Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Welcome to Just Nicolas Cage, where I very slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography. And today I'm talking about the 2002 meta-comedy drama movie Adaptation. In the movie Adaptation, Nicolas Cage plays Charlie Kaufman, a screenwriter that's struggling with writer's block while trying to adapt the book The Orchid Thief. Nicolas Cage also plays Donald Kaufman, his identical twin brother who's also getting into writing but's having a much easier time. And also we see the event from the book The Orchid Thief that's being adapted play out, and then they begin to deviate from the book and interconnect with Charlie Kaufman's life. But really, that's only the tip of the iceberg as to what this movie is about. It's a Charlie Kaufman script, so of course there's layers upon layers going on here requiring intertextual context. It is a dense, complex film.
I mean, come on, Charlie Kaufman. Some of us have work in the morning, damn.
So let's attempt to peel it all apart one by one. We should start by talking about the writer of the film, Charlie Kaufman. Charlie Kaufman is known for some really outside-of-the-box movie concepts. Like Synecdoche, New York, a movie about a man trying to make his magnum opus by creating a replica of New York in a warehouse to depict everyday life, and then the line between reality and the world of the play begins to blur. He also wrote and directed Anomalisa, a stop-motion puppet movie where almost every character is voiced by Tom Noonan to represent the protagonist's view of the monotony of society. I mean, the first movie Charlie Kaufman wrote is about a portal that when entered allows you to control the actor John Malkovich. And that's actually one of his more accessible films. Kaufman's films are unique, they often break the traditional structure of storytelling, and they often contain themes of nihilism and existentialism which get explored in weird and wonderful creative ways. I really think he's a contender for my favorite screenwriter of all time, and I think he's a great director when he's directed his own films. He's one of those guys that when you hear there's a new movie coming out with his name on the credits, I'm always like, I don't even need to know what it's about, I'm already sold if he's involved. I very recently watched the new DreamWorks kids movie Orion in the Dark, mainly because Charlie Kaufman wrote it, and I really enjoyed it. But instead, let's go back to near the very start of Charlie Kaufman's career. Charlie Kaufman was in popular demand after his debut Oscar-nominated screenplay Being John Malkovich, and he was hired by Columbia Pictures to write an adaptation of the non-fiction book The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean. Charlie Kaufman greatly struggled with this task and suffered from writer's block, until he found the only way that he could make the movie work in a way that satisfied him. And that's the process we see in the film Adaptation. Except he also added a fictional twin brother and a bunch of other wacky stuff, but I'll get into that later. But for now, let's explore the book that is the subject matter of the titular adaptation, The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean. The Orchid Thief is a non-fiction account by the journalist Susan Orlean who delves into the world of orchid collecting and poaching. Specifically, it explores her time with a man named John LaRoche, who was arrested after trying to exploit a loophole in the law to get a rare ghost orchid from the Fakahachi Strand State Preserve. I read the book, and to be honest, I really didn't enjoy it at all. It is a non-fiction book, but the narrative is thin and the pacing is rough. I'm fully aware that in my videos I go on a lot of tangents, but this book goes on some goddamn digressions. Like, there will be something interesting, like how John LaRoche was trying to exploit a loophole by working with the Seminoles, and then the next 4 pages will be a detailed history about the agricultural condition of Florida in 1848. There's chapters that detail the intricacies of how orchids pollinate or whatever. There's a lot of history about the expeditions of Victorian orchid hunters. I mean, I call them digressions, but technically it is a book about flowers and she's talking about flowers. And it might just come down to personal taste, because personally I've never taken any interest in flowers. If it wasn't for this video, I never would have gone anywhere near a book about orchids. So parts like this where she was just listing what different orchids look like was driving me insane. One looks like a German Shepherd, one looks like an onion, one looks like a human nose, one looks like fancy shoes a king would wear, one looks like a monkey, one looks dead.
There's pineapple shrimp, lemon shrimp, coconut shrimp, pepper shrimp.
That being said, I did glean some interesting orchid facts from the book, like the fact that during the Ming Dynasty, orchids were used to treat venereal diseases, diarrhea, and sick elephants. Or that Victorian women were forbidden from owning orchids because the shape of the flowers were too sexually suggestive for their constitutions. And my personal favorite orchid fact is that the Latin name for orchid means testicle, because it was long believed that orchids sprang from the spilled semen of mating animals. Maybe the fact that those were the things that piqued my interest in the book says more about me. But really the biggest highlight of the book is John LaRoche. He's only really around for about a third of the book, which is kind of disappointing. But as is stated multiple times in Adaptation, he's quite the fun character.
LaRoche is a fun character, isn't he?
Absolutely.
LaRoche is such a fun character.
Yeah.
Early on, we found out that he once accidentally spilled toxic pesticide on his hand and got permanent heart and liver damage from it. But he thinks that was all for the best because he sold an article about what happened. He also wanted to write a guide in a marijuana magazine, advertising how to grow weed and intentionally give advice that wouldn't work to give kids an interest in growing plants. But I think the key to understanding his motivation for breaking the law to obtain a flower is revealed when you find out how much of an obsessive personality he has. When he was a kid, he got a turtle, and then he got 10 of them, then he bred them and sold them and collected them, and then all of a sudden he abandoned that for a bunch of other obsessions. He moved on to Ice Age fossils, then he gave that up and got into old mirrors, and then tropical fish. At one point he had over 60 fish tanks in the house, and then one day he just gave it all up. For him, those things aren't a hobby, they're obsessions that consume his life. At one point in the book he even says it's not really about collecting the thing itself. It's about getting immersed in something and learning about it and having it become a part of your life. It's a kind of direction. There's actually a similar quote from somebody else in the book about why they collect orchids. I think the real reason is that life has no meaning. You wake up, you go to work, you do stuff. I think that everybody's always looking for something a little unusual that can preoccupy them and help them pass the time. And that's something I definitely can get behind. It's the part of the book that resonated with me the most. Maybe because I actually think that these Nicolas Cage reviews are filling a similar role to me and giving me a bit of purpose in my life. And the theme for searching for meaning and happiness in life is certainly a theme that crops up in a lot of Charlie Kaufman's films. And it's also a crucial part of adaptation.
You are what you love, not what loves you.
But to go back to the idea of obsession, the quest for orchids in the book really does feel like a symbol of fixation. It's the story of the pursuit of something that's extremely difficult to obtain. It's almost like the white whale in Moby Dick. I mean, listen to this quote from the book. When a man falls in love with orchids, he'll do anything to possess the one he wants. It's like chasing a green-eyed woman or taking cocaine. It's a sort of madness. Yo, you want to do a line of coke? No thank you, I'm gonna go look for an orchid. Much better buzz. Actually, the drug metaphor is quite interesting knowing the direction adaptation takes in the third act. But I do think that cocaine quote is a fascinating way to describe orchid collecting. Because as I found out, it's a lot more serious than I thought. It's a dangerous ambition. The author of the book goes through swamps infested by alligators, while being accompanied by machete-wielding ex-convicts just to try and find an orchid. And lots of people have died while collecting orchids. And the truth is that a collector who wants one of every orchid species on Earth will certainly die before even coming close. This ambition for completing a seemingly Sisyphean task that makes them obsessed and consumes their life and makes them spiral into insanity is yet another parallel with adaptation in the way that writer's block is presented in the film. It is interesting that as much as the film deviates from the book, a lot of the key themes are in there. As the author of the book, Susan Orlean, said about adaptation, what I admire most is that it's very true to the book's themes of life and obsession. There's also insights into the things that are much more subtle in the book, like longing and disappointment. Susan Orlean was initially against the film when she read the script, which is understandable. I mean, at one point in the film she's depicted as appearing on a porn site. And there's a great part in the movie where Charlie Kaufman calls her some pretty nasty things.
Fuck you, lady! You're just a lonely, old, desperate, pathetic drug addict!
But like she says in this interview, she eventually came around to it.
I did have real concerns that people wouldn't understand what part of this was real and what wasn't. And at the same time, I felt that it was truer to the spirit of the book than a conventional film could have been.
It's a little hard to explain.
Wait, is that me up on stage with her? Things are getting meta just by talking about Charlie Kaufman. So let's talk about why the process of turning this book into a film presented so many problems for Charlie Kaufman. Having read the book, I get why it would be hard to adapt. I've already discussed my issues with the book. There's not enough LaRoche, and there's long, boring digressions with no real focus. And what's funny is I hadn't seen this movie in about 10 years. I read the book for the first time recently and took down my thoughts. And then I rewatched the movie. And there's a part where the Charlie Kaufman character reads a review of the book, and it's almost identical word for word to what I'd written down about it.
I mean, you have the crazy plant nut guy, right? He's funny.
There's not nearly enough of him to fill a book. So Orlean digresses in long passages, blah, blah, blah. No narrative really unites these passages. New York Times book review. I can't structure this.
But yet the book is much more anecdotal than it is narrative-driven, which traditionally doesn't really lend itself to the medium of film. And even the character and story arcs that you can extract from the book are pretty unconventional, to say the least. At the end, John LaRoche gets fired by the Seminole tribe members. He completely gives up on flowers and gets into the internet porn distribution business. It's hard to really do something with that narratively, and the author of the book, Susan Orlean, never even sees a ghost orchid by the end of the book. There's something deeply unsatisfying about that being the ending. It's a story about ghost orchids. You want it to end with a ghost orchid. Susan Orlean in the book even says, I did desperately want to see a ghost orchid in bloom to complete the cycle. Even she acknowledges that that's a way better way for the book to end. But I suppose she just wrote about what really happened. And that's life. Not everything ends up in a neat and tidy story arc. But as Charlie Kaufman shows, it's hard to translate that into a satisfying story. While reading the book, I tried to put myself in Charlie Kaufman's shoes. If I was a screenwriter, how would I go about trying to adapt this? And I don't think at any point I would have come up with the idea to insert myself and a fictional twin brother into the narrative.
I've written myself into my screenplay. That's kind of weird, huh?
But I do think it's possible to make a straightforward adaptation of the book, and interestingly, Kaufman himself proves that. Because within the movie, we do essentially see a straightforward adaptation of the book. Susan Orlean meeting LaRoche outside the courtroom, her getting to know him, them going to flower shows together, them in the swamp together getting lost at the end. All of that is in the book. There's even dramatic depictions of events that we hear about alluded to in the book, like LaRoche stealing the ghost orchid from the reserve and getting caught, and the tragic car crash that he was in. These parts play out almost exactly like how they would be shown in a standard adaptation of the book. There's even parts that are word for word the exact same as in the book.
If the ghost orchid was really a phantom, it was still such a bewitching one that it could seduce people to pursue it year after year, and mile after miserable mile.
A lot of the scenes with Orlean and LaRoche together in adaptation remind me of the movie The End of the Tour with Jason Segel and Jesse Eisenberg. It's about the journalist David Lipsky's encounter with the writer David Foster Wallace. The movie isn't very plot-driven, it's essentially just a road trip with a journalist and a larger-than-life guy. And I think that's the quote-unquote easy way to adapt The Orchid Thief. Keep it down to just the stuff between Orlean and LaRoche. They don't find a ghost orchid, but I guess the real ghost orchid with the friends we made along the way. Roll credits. I think that could have made for a fine movie. But the thing is, if Charlie Kaufman made the film I just described, I would have been disappointed. That's way too conventional for him. It's not what he's about. It would probably end up in the same category as Human Nature and Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, as Charlie Kaufman scripts that don't feel Charlie Kaufman-y. But thankfully, that's not the movie we got at all. And instead, he wrote the most Charlie Kaufman-iest script Charlie Kaufman possibly could write. But let's get into the Susan Orlean and John LaRoche stuff in the movie that isn't in the book. I'll get to all the bonkers stuff that happens in the third act later. But I want to talk about the romantic plot between LaRoche and Orlean. In the movie, they tease out an attraction between the two which culminates in a romantic relationship, which did not happen whatsoever in real life. But what's interesting is how organically that romance plot blends in with the events from the book. In fact, when I first saw this movie 10 years ago, I actually thought that part was real. Even though early on there is a line from the executive about wanting to add a love story.
I guess we thought that maybe Susan Orlean and LaRoche could fall in love.
Okay. But what really impressed me after reading the book is that there's lines from The Orchid Thief that are in the movie, but they're recontextualized to further fabricate the love story. Like this line in the book about how things in LaRoche's life and passions are often fleeting and out of reach. But in the movie, they use the exact same line to make it look like Susan Orlean is falling in love with LaRoche.
Life seemed to be filled with things that were just like the ghost orchid. Wonderful to imagine and easy to fall in love with. A little fantastic and fleeting when out of reach.
And the movie even makes it look like that's the last line in the book when it's actually from way earlier. The way Kaufman tweaks parts of the book is very clever. Even that part I talked about earlier in the book where she's listing all the different varieties of orchids is referenced.
One looks like a turtle. One looks like a monkey. One looks like an onion.
Except then in the movie it turns into Charlie Kaufman listing all the different women he notices.
One looks like a school teacher. One looks like a gymnast. One looks like that girl in high school with creamy skin. One looks like Amelia. One has eyes that dance. One has eyes that contain the sadness of the world.
I made fun of that part in the book for being boring, but here now it's changed to give us insight into the fixations of the protagonist, so now it's more interesting. Okay, so usually I like to keep my reviews relatively spoiler-free, especially when the movie's good, but I have to do a deep dive into the last act of this movie. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then here's your spoiler warning. So there's a crucial scene about 5 minutes into the film, where Charlie Kaufman meets with a producer and he discusses all of the things that he doesn't want to end up in his film. I want you to listen carefully to all the things that he mentions.
I'd want to let the movie exist rather than be artificially plot-driven. I just don't want to ruin it by making it a Hollywood thing. You know, changing the orchids into poppies and turning it into a movie about drug running, you know? It's like I don't want to cram in sex or guns or car chases, you know, or characters, you know, learning profound life lessons or growing or coming to like each other or overcoming obstacles to succeed in the end, you know.
And then in the last 30 minutes of the movie, the story from the orchid thief becomes artificially plot-driven and turns into a Hollywood story involving drug running, sex, guns, and car chases, where the characters learn profound life lessons and grow to come to like each other. And I think it goes without saying that none of that happens in the book. At first it's very jarring when all that crazy stuff happens in the movie, because so much of this movie is about resisting the typical conventions and tropes of movies. And then it ends in such a dumb way that feels like it goes against everything the movie stood for. But at a certain point it becomes clear that now we're watching Donald Kaufman's movie. A trashy, dumb, cliche Hollywood traditional ending. It becomes a thriller, which as Donald says earlier is his favorite genre.
My genre's thriller. What's yours?
You and I share the same DNA.
I think the ending in the movie is the real Charlie Kaufman saying, sometimes you can stick to the conventions and what's approved of, while also making fun of the tropes. It kind of reminds me of the song The Hook by Blues Traveler. That's a catchy 4-chord song, but the lyrics are openly mocking those kind of songs. And guess what? That song was a hit. I think Kaufman is doing something similar here. And like with that song, the ending of this movie is still kind of enjoyable in a bass, turn off your brain kind of a way. There's even one moment in particular that I think was meant to be cheesy, but I think it really works on an unironic emotional level. It's such a good ending. Earlier in the movie, Robert McKee stresses the importance of the ending of a film.
The last act makes a film. Wow them in the end. You got a hit. You can have flaws, problems, but wow them in the end.
And I think the ending makes this film. It's perfect for the message that Kaufman was trying to get across. It's a great bit of satire presented in a fun way, and I definitely think it's earned, especially with all the meta foreshadowing at the start. Speaking of that, this movie as a whole is very meta, and not in the Zuckerberg way. Like a fun example of the movie being meta is the movie opens with Charlie Kaufman sweating while he's talking to a movie producer. And then an hour into the movie, Charlie Kaufman pitches how he wants his movie to open, and it's exactly what we saw an hour ago.
Kaufman, fat, old, bald, repulsive, sitting in a Hollywood restaurant across from Valerie Thomas, a lovely, statuesque film executive.
And then he pitches his pitch of the opening of the movie.
Fat, bald, Kaufman paces furiously in his bedroom. He speaks into his handheld tape recorder, and he says, Charlie Kaufman, fat, bald, repulsive, old, sits at a Hollywood restaurant with Valerie Thomas.
I think I'm getting a nosebleed. There's one part of the movie that isn't even meta, but it works on an extra level that even Charlie Kaufman couldn't have predicted, where Donald's talking about his idea for a movie about a cop trying to figure out a serial killer's identity. And the big twist is that the killer and the cop are the same person because the killer has multiple personalities. And then Charlie Kaufman ridicules the whole premise.
The only idea more overused than serial killers is multiple personality. Mom called it psychologically taut.
And then in real life, about 3 months later, a movie came out called Identity starring Ray Liotta and John Cusack, in which, spoiler alert, the big reveal is that the killer has multiple personalities and most of the characters we've seen are all the same person. I can't help but feel bad for the people who made the movie Identity. Especially when I saw this quote from the director. When I saw Adaptation, I realized I was dead. Half the reviews of Identity were going, like, this is the movie about the stupid joke. Somebody made a movie of the joke in Adaptation. There's a possibility that the script for that movie was floating around Hollywood for a while, and at some point Charlie Kaufman read it so the reference is intentional. But I don't think he would intentionally mock and spoil the ending of a movie that hadn't even released yet. I'm pretty sure it was just a coincidence. Because there's a part later where Donald Kaufman is talking about the imagery of a split personality movie involving broken mirrors, and it's purposely hacky sounding.
Because of my multiple personality theme, I've chosen the motif of broken mirrors to show my protagonist's fragmented self.
Now take a look at the poster for the M. Night Shyamalan movie Split, about a killer with multiple personalities that came out 15 years later. What's even crazier is in 2006 there was a movie about a killer with split personalities, and it's called The Three, which is the name of the fake movie in Adaptation. But to go back to the meta stuff, another example that I really like is that the movie uses stream of conscious voiceover throughout, until the moment where Robert McKee criticizes it.
I should leave here right now. I'll start over. I need to face this project head on
And God help you if you use voiceover in your work, my friends. God help you. It's flaccid, sloppy writing.
And then after that, we don't hear any voiceover again in the movie until the very end. I think that's very clever. That Robert McKee scene is my favorite part of the movie. In fact, I think it's one of my favorite scenes in any movie ever. Brian Cox plays Robert McKee, who's a real-life lecturer and story consultant. Charlie Kaufman attends his seminar and asks him a fairly innocuous question about writing a screenplay when nothing much happens to reflect real life, and here's the response.
First of all, you write a screenplay without conflict or crisis, you'll bore your audience to tears. Secondly, nothing happens in the world? Are you out of your fucking mind? People are murdered every day. Every fucking day, somewhere in the world, somebody sacrifices his life to save somebody else. Every fucking day, someone somewhere takes a conscious decision to destroy someone else. People find love, people lose it. For Christ's sake, a child watches a mother beaten to death on the steps of a church. If you can't find that stuff in life, then you, my friend, don't know crap about life. And why the fuck are you wasting my 2 precious hours with your movie? I don't have any use for it. I don't have any bloody use for it.
God damn, I love that scene. I don't even necessarily agree with everything he's saying, especially the part where he says a movie without conflict or crisis will bore the audience to tears. There's a movie called Patterson where Adam Driver plays a bus driver that's basically about nothing, and I like that movie, it was quite compelling. But that doesn't matter, I still love the scene. Mainly because man oh man is that monologue delivered to perfection by Brian Cox. I love that Brian Cox goes full Logan Roy.
Fuck off. Fuck off.
I also love Nicolas Cage's reaction after all of that.
Okay, thanks.
The real Robert McKee was actually the one who suggested for Brian Cox to play him, which, great call, and they really look similar too. Robert McKee actually only agreed to be in this film if they cut out the part with the swamp ape. That's right, the original script of this movie had a swamp monster show up and kill John LaRoche at the end. I think Robert McKee's distaste for that is loosely referenced in the movie.
And don't you dare bring in a Deus Ex Machina.
In the actual movie, they swap out the swamp ape for a crocodile, but honestly, I wish they kept the swamp creature. I feel deprived. It's like how the Watchmen movie swapped out the giant squid for like an energy blast or whatever. I think the swamp monster ending would have been hilarious, and believe it or not, it's actually referred to in the book. So let's talk about Nicolas Cage's performance. Both of them. One of my favorite things about Nicolas Cage is how versatile he is as an actor. He can personify a whole range of human emotions, often in a single performance. And his performance in Adaptation as twin brothers showcases all the facets of what Nick Cage can do. The serious and the lighthearted, the subtle and the broad. These facets are showcased literally side by side, and it's very entertaining. I love how differently Nick Cage plays the characters even though they're identical. You always know which one's Charlie and which one is Donald. Even their posture is different. Charlie as a character is depressed, self-loathing, and neurotic. And I can't help but relate to him a lot in this movie with his anxieties and the writer's block aspect of the character. I think that's something we've all been through with an essay. Whereas Donald Kaufman is the complete opposite. He's fun, he's happier with his life, everybody loves him. He's blissfully ignorant, whereas Charlie carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's everything Charlie wants to be, but also everything Charlie doesn't want to be. I think Donald represents as a whole the easy Hollywood option. Like, this is what Charlie could be if he sold out. I really think this is one of Nicolas Cage's finest performances, especially knowing that he's not actually playing opposite anybody else. Like, he would film one part, and then play the other part while listening back to the audio he just recorded in his earpiece, but he would just be acting against a tennis ball on a stand. Apparently Nicolas Cage interviewed Charlie Kaufman to get the performance down, and he also said that they'd be at dinner together, and then Charlie Kaufman would just start doing weird things, like flapping the menu under his arms like a chicken. And Cage thinks that he was just doing that to see if he would take the bait and start doing it in the movie. Nick Cage also called Adaptation his biggest challenge as an actor. Nicolas Cage earned his second ever Academy Award nomination for this movie, but he didn't win. I honestly think he should have been up for Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. Has that even ever happened when somebody is up for both for the same movie? I don't know. But the winner of Best Supporting Actor actually went to Chris Cooper as John LaRoche in Adaptation. Chris Cooper is really good in the movie, but I will say it doesn't strike me as an Oscar-winning performance. Possibly because I'm comparing it to how insanely good Nicolas Cage is. But I do think Chris Cooper does a great job. He's very charismatic. Meryl Streep was also nominated for Best Supporting Actress. I don't have much to say about her in this movie, but she's very good. I mean, of course she is. It's Meryl Streep. There's also a very funny video of Meryl Streep accepting Charlie Kaufman's BAFTA for Best Screenplay on behalf of him. And she has to read this very Charlie Kaufman-y speech that he wrote.
I feel some pressure to come up with a speech that Meryl won't mind reading aloud. I feel pressure to give her a joke, but simultaneously the great fear that I might give her inadvertently a bad joke and it will bomb, and it will be as if I have spit on Meryl Streep. This man is out of his mind. I would like to thank BAFTA for this wonderful honor. I would like to thank Spike Jones.
Knowing Charlie Kaufman, I wouldn't be surprised if the speech actually said, pretend to accidentally say I would like to spank, feign surprise, hold for laughter. So overall, I love this movie. I think it's really, really smart. It covers so much. Writer's block, personal identity. It's about life and it's about love. There's clever commentary on Hollywood and story structure. It's highbrow and it's lowbrow. It's silly and it's profound. It works on so many levels, and even then I think I've only scratched the surface in terms of my understanding of it. Nicolas Cage gives one of the best performances of his career here. And also you have 2 Nick Cages for the price of 1. I mean, who doesn't love that? But I also get that postmodern self-aware irony is not everybody's cup of tea either. I mean, 3 minutes into this movie is a scene set 4 billion years earlier, showing evolution and a horrifying image of a fox decomposing into maggots and graphic footage of a baby being born. That's a little too much for a lot of people, and that's fine. I also think that if you haven't seen a Charlie Kaufman movie before, you shouldn't start with this one. Get accustomed to Charlie Kaufman's style, and then if you like it, move up to Adaptation. So the next movie Nicolas Cage did is Matchstick Men. So until next time guys, thanks for watching.